All right, today I thought I would talk about the speech evaluation. What does it entail? Well, who should have one? Why should you have one? Um, People often say, I know it's wrong, you just can't say this sound, but there's a lot more than just saying one sound. Okay, so what you want to do is, if it's respect for your child, does he have different difficulty producing words? That's the most obvious speech problem. The cute little lisp that, is cute at 4 and 5, not cute at 7. Um, the other thing that we look at sometimes is, does the child have a limited number of words? Like, if a 2-year-old is not saying 2 and 3 word phrases, if he's not labeling things that you're saying to him, what's this? What's this? You know, as he gets to be 3, does he not make a sentence? Or as an older child, do they have trouble formulating a whole concept? Oftentimes children will be telling you a story and you'll be like, what the heck is he talking about? Because they're not giving you the words. They'll go, and that thing, this thing, that, and you have no idea. And the other thing is, when you look at a 3-year-old or 2-year-old, people say, oh, at 2, he can't say all the sounds. I don't expect him to say all the sounds, but I expect him to have words that if he says ooh, ooh all the time, and that means juice, that's an acceptable word. You don't expect him to have the just sound, and you don't expect him to have the S sound. So that's normal. But a 2-year-old should be about 40 to 50% intelligible to other people. Like, if you're the grandmother, you don't have to understand everything. It's by 3, they should be 75% intelligible. If you're still translating for your child at 3 years old, there's something else going on. And as the child gets older, is he embarrassed, to talk to other, is he still lisping and he's 8 or 9? Is he stuttering and you haven't done anything about it? And one of the things that we see with some children is they just stop participating. Oh, I don't like to play that game. Oh, I don't want to go to a chorus. Oh, I don't want to, and you have to say to yourself, why does a child not want to do anything? There's got to be something that they like. And the same thing with an adult. It could be yourself, it could be an adult you live with, an adult you're caring for. If they've been diagnosed with a specific disorder, such as Parkinson's, such as ALS, we want to give them the opportunity to learn some alternate ways to communicate, because, eventually they're not going to be able to use their voice. So one of the advantages of having speech therapy in the early stages of those disorders is we give them an alternative. Nowadays, there's so many more alternatives, like, the iPads. There's speech on some of the apps is from speech to talk, so they can type in and it talks for you. So they still can go to the restaurant and order something, because they'll look at the menu and send it through. For some adults, I've had many adults who stuttered, they didn't pay any attention. I have a young man now, he's like 23 years old. Ironically, I worked with him when he was 5 and he didn't have any words, but he came back because he's going to graduate school to be an accountant, and his stuttering is awful. And he just hadn't done anything about it. He just was very quiet all through high school. The other thing that speech therapists deal with in terms of swallowing. Sometimes as you get older, swallowing is one of the first things that you notice that you have one of the degenerative diseases, like they're choking. All of a sudden, you're saying, oh, I choke on water, I choke on soft foods. So that's another area that we deal with. Sometimes people with an accent, is very acceptable, and we're in New York where it's more acceptable, but is it affecting your ability to rise up at the ranks at work? That's the one time where you should do it. I'm working with a woman right now. She's a college professor. I mean, I think her English is impeccable, but she feels that the accent is not, where she wants it to be. She wants it to be less so that she can continue. But as I said, she's a college professor, so it hasn't affected her rising up the ranks. So I must have hit the button. Okay, what is a speech? and language evaluation, which I've said before to people. Speech is how we say it. The articulation is that this sounds correctly. Am I stuttering? Is my voice so hoarse that it's almost inaudible? So that's the speech. The language is what we use. It's receptively. Do we understand what's being said to us? Does the child follow your directions? If you say, go upstairs and get me your shoes, you know, granted they get distracted, but can they really do that if they're paying attention? So when we look at an evaluation, and oftentimes people are like, why do I have to fill out so many pages? Because I need to see the whole picture. You know, do I need to see what went on when a child was younger, or even as an adult? What has happened to get you to the point where you're calling me up? And then we do some formal and informal testing. When they're younger, we like to do some observations. We don't really need to do that with the adult, but overall, we want to get a whole picture. I had a couple months ago, I had a young girl. She was about 7 or 8, and she came in, and the mom says she just doesn't say R. So I said, all right. And I proceeded to do the evaluation, and I did my speech area and I did my language area. And I said to the mom, I said, she's not, you know, does she have trouble in school? And like, oh God, she's having so much trouble. I thought if we fix this R, then she'll do better. I said, well, I really think we got to look at processing, because when I asked her a question, everything was a pause. And when she gave me some answers, they were not accurate. Anything with an abstract concept, she couldn't do it. So mom agreed, and I did another day of testing in terms of processing. And what happened was she was severely impaired in that area. The mom went to school because she would say to the school, can't you, you know, work on her R's? And they're like, we don't do articulation therapy. And, but when they came back with my evaluation, they did they did some more testing. They took some of my testing, they did more. And what they did was she ended up getting, many kids with processing get what they call an auditory trainer, where they have, the teacher wears a mic and they wear a mic with, sometimes with headphones, sometimes just with an earplug, so that they're hearing things directly. There's no outside noises to distract them, because that's a big area. So that's why we have to do the whole evaluation. And another thing to look at, which people don't understand, is how you do the results. If I give you the results of a child who's 4 years and 8 months, I look up some of the scores. Some tests go in 6-month increments, some go in 2-month increments. So what happens is, if you are scoring at the 50th percentile and have 100 standard score, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. You know, it confuses people because it's 50. Now, a standard deviation, which I don't even know what that is, the psychologists come up with that, is where they say it's all the normal range. So when you think of things, the normal range, according to the school districts, is between the 16th and the 84th percentile. Well, let's face it, if you're at the 16th percentile, you're struggling. But they just do that so that they, you know, don't have to pay for it, or don't have to provide you the services. So what happens is, if people come privately, I usually say anything below 25, because when I went to school, the average range was from 25 to 75. So it's just kind of changed a little bit. But when you look at these scores, that's what you want to see. You want to see the average range, which is a very broad range. You know, I say I want to see my kids functioning at least at the 40th. If they're below that, I want to support them and give them some help. And why should you get one? If you're concerned, if you have a concern about your child, and I say this to moms all the time, if you have a gut feeling that something's wrong, let's test. Because you know what? 90% of the time, you're right. And maybe it won't be a speech area, but it might be an area that I can refer you to somebody else. Sometimes, especially with the kids with ADD or ADHD, they may be okay in some areas. They actually will perform good in the areas that they like. They'll perform poor in the areas that they don't like. And that kind of gives us a clue. Do we need to treat? You know, treating ADHD is, you know, there's a fine line, and the timing is of the essence. What happens is, oftentimes they will be able to function with behavior charts, especially when they're young, because you don't want to start medicating a 3 or 4-year-old, because that's normal to be distracted. But anyway, so for ADHD and ADD, we want to look at those areas and we refer out. I'm not going to make a decision that this child needs medicine, but I said to the parent, go to the neuropsychologist or the developmental pediatrician and start the pattern so that they can see him now, they can see him in 6 months and see where it's going. Also in evaluation, I get to determine when they should start. You know, if you bring me a child who's 20 months old and he has 2 words, but he's like making it more attempts, I might say, let's give him 6 weeks. Let's try it out and write down everything. What happens sometimes, parents don't realize that ooh for juice is a word. Anything that they can use to communicate is actually a word. And when I look at a child and I determine, yes, they need it, like I'd have to determine how much do they need. I can't tell you the length of therapy because I never know how a child is going to be reacting, but I can say, you know, this child should be seen twice a week. This child should be seen 3 times a week. Also, there's times where children would be better suited in a group rather than individual therapy, particularly for social skills. That somebody who's socially awkward, or if they have a social pragmatic disorder, which is somewhat like autism but not autism, they're just socially inept. And that type of therapy, you might initially start out with individual, but what you really need to see them is in a group. That's, I just said, the social skills. And also sometimes we can help in terms of where they should be educationally. If a child is not going to be able to function with 20 or 22 other children, then we have to give us some definite reasons why they can't, so that we can go to the school and say, this is what a child needs. You know, I don't want to see that child just lost in the back of the room. Maybe if it's got an auditory processing disorder, I want to make sure that he has preferential seating. And when you write an IEP for a child in the schools, these are all things that are put on. Does he need preferential seating? Does he need directions restated? And when you have an IEP for a child, you want to put everything in there, because once it's in there, that's a legal document and it's binding. So the teachers, they can't say, oh, I'm not repeating for you. She has to. It's not her choice. And also, what I want to do is give parents activities that they will help improve the child at home. For example, if a child has poor memory skills, play games that are going to improve it. Play Simon Says. Do they remember what doing? And do it if you're in a car trip. You know, the old thing, you know, what are you bringing to the picnic? And you start with the alphabet. I'm bringing apples. The other one says apples and bananas. The next one, apples and bananas and cheese. Those are things that just improve the kids' skills. And what happens is we see this where, you know, when I was a child, it was normal. And when I had my children, we played those games. But now oftentimes the kids have devices. So they're using them all the time. You know, they have a good point in life, but there's a point where you should say, shut them off. We're going to play a real game. And that's a good thing, because turn taking and other social skills are really met best through play. All right. And then also, if a child needs more, sometimes I have to bring a dentist in if the articulation, or if it's called myofunctional therapy, where their tongue is out all the time or it's pushing against their teeth. So these are all things that we're going to notice on that evaluation. And then some of the questions, what do I do? Call, you know, and at what age? The age should be when you see that there's a problem. And people always ask me, how long will the evaluation take? I don't know. It could take 45 minutes. It could take 2 hours or 3 hours. It all depends on what I see in the first 45 minutes, if I need to proceed and do more. The receptive language disorder is understanding. Can I follow those directions? Do I understand what is being asked of me? And the expressive language is, I'm saying it. Some children, you know, a mom will come in like, he understands everything. He goes and gets the shoes, he does all this, but he doesn't there's no output. That's an expressive language disorder. And as an adult, you often see the expressive language disorder. I mean, part of it is common, like it drives me absolutely absolutely nuts when I can't think of a word that I want to say, or I go into the other room to get something. I'm like, what did I come in here for? That happens. That's normal. It's part of the aging process. But if it happens too often, then that's when you are going to get concerned and get an evaluation. For children, are they showing signs of autism? More and more, when I'll never forget when I went with my son to the doctors because he had to bring the baby in the beginning, and my daughter-in-law was sick. So I bring him, and he gives him this sheet of questions, does he play alone? Does he do this? Does he line up the cars? And my son's like, oh my God, and I said, he's looking for autism. That's part of the autism, screening process. They give it to the parents at 1 and they give it to the parents at 2 to try to rule out, what's going on. And people say, oh, he's so good playing by himself. That's a good thing. But if he only wants to play by himself, that's a bad thing. And the social pragmatic language disorder is often seen, we all probably went to school with that child who was a nerd, who kid was a whiz at math, could do everything. But, he didn't have the social skills. He didn't want to play games. During lunchtime, he just leaned against the wall. And back then they let kids lean against the wall. I don't think they let them anymore. All right. So that's what you wanted to see. If it's a social pragmatic disorder, socially, they are inept. They don't want to communicate. They'll answer you in yes and no, but there's no big conversation. So this is all another reason to be concerned. And some of the areas too, is stuttering normal? Stuttering is very normal between the ages of 2 and 3, but by 3 it should disappear. All right. An articulation disorder, I touched on that before. It's any inability to say a particular sound, a group of sounds. When it's more like a group of sounds, it's called a phonological disorder. For example, if they leave off the ending of every word. The signs of articulation and phonology disorders, they're the most evident because you can't understand them. They leave off the endings. They leave off the middle. All right. An evaluation cost depends on how much time we've put in it. A lot of times the insurance companies will cover an evaluation even if they won't cover therapy, but the cost varies. Well, this evaluation, I always hear this, oh, is it going to be too dramatic for him? I mean, this is not, such a severe effect. For the most part, you're asking them to look at pictures, answer questions, play with a toy. And should I have an evaluation done? If you have doubts, if you have concerns, whether it's for yourself, for your parent, for your child, have it done. It's better to rule everything out and say everything's fine than to sit here and wonder like, oh, what should I do? What should I do? Because so many times people say, I knew this last year. And I always say, well, you're here now, so let's not go back on the past. But the reality is sometimes if they had come last year, they would be that much better at this point, and it would have been less trauma on the child. Because even though I'm working right now with a little boy, he's 5, and he stutters. And the mom, when I spoke to the mom on the phone before I met the child, she's like, it really doesn't bother him. He doesn't even know he's doing it. So the first day I said to him, sometimes your speech is bumpy. He says, yeah, I get stuck when I say I. So they know. They absolutely know. And so I guess that was it. Okay. Do you have any questions?